Welcome back to the Stratford Vibe Exchange. My name's Karim Rushdy. We're filming live at Fresh and Free Studios in Nancy Campbell Academy, downtown Stratford. For this episode, I have a very, very, very special guest. I'm very honored that he's here. His name is Mr. Gordon Naylor, and welcome.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
So I've known you for a very long time. You founded this school, Nancy Campbell, with your wife, Ellen, and you sold your house and moved into this building downtown to start the school. So why did you start this school?
Sacrifices had to be made. I was very concerned about the education that my 5 children were about to get at a high school level, and I had sent one of my daughters to a school out in British Columbia, the Maxwell Baha'i School, and I didn't want to send all 5 of them out there. And
right.
because I had, they weren't children that I wanted to say goodbye to. So I was very eager to figure out how to do this. And we couldn't move out because I had operated at the time several treatment homes for abused youth and children. So there were just too many people's lives that were connected to what we had to do. And so we decided that we should start the school.
Just open our own school.
Yeah, that was the idea. I think my biggest motivation was that my eldest daughter had gone to grade 9 in a small town where we lived. We weren't living in Stratford at the time. And I remember at the end of grade 9, she said that she wanted to quit school. And I was shocked because she was a very good student, doing very well. But she basically said, Dad, I can't talk about sex, drugs, alcohol, and backbiting for the next 3 years, and that's all that's going on. So she wasn't very happy with that, even though, of course, she could navigate through that. But the other thing she said was, unfortunately for her, that she felt that the teachers didn't want to teach and the students didn't want to learn, and she didn't quite figure out.
Right.
And she said, and I don't know who to blame. So I thought, well, that's a kind of interesting dilemma, and I'm sure that the teachers were trying to do well, but at the same time, there's some kind of serious indifference that's going on in a lot of these environments. So I just thought this is not something that I would want to spend my next 3 years involved in either. So why would I think it's okay to subject my children to that?
That's a pretty profound thought for a grade 9 kid to have.
Yeah.
So that tells me that you and Ellen really raised your kids with a certain set of values, for them to be able to ask those questions or have that perception of their reality, and really be aware of that. Is that something you think was intentional that you and Ellen did, that you raised your kids with a level of awareness of some kind? Or are they just amazing kids born like that?
I think anyone that has kids would not be able to say that. They would know that it's a struggle. But I think that we really wanted ourselves and our children to be conscious and to actually think about what's going on, what are the consequences, what are the issues facing the community. So we were always in that kind of environment, creating that kind of environment for discussion in our home, and really valuing we're members of the Baha'i faith. We were really valuing the importance of being a lover of the truth. So we wanted to establish, and my wife is particularly good at that, establishing the greatest value was that we would be truthful about how we're feeling and what's going on, and also not just identify the problems and issues, but also become someone that would rise up to build something, to change things. So, at this time, I think a lot of people, if they are conscious, when I say that, I mean if they're actually thinking about what they're doing and why they're doing it, then then I think that's sometimes all we do, and we can become just very critical instead of figuring out, okay, well, now that we've identified what's going on, how are we going to make a contribution to move this forward if we're supposed to have an ever-advancing civilization? So that was the framework that we worked in all the time from the earliest years with our kids. And so they were always aware of our interest in knowing their perceptions of things and, them updating us on what's really going on in their world, because it would be wrong for us to assume that their world was the same as ours at their age.
I love that. That's a beautiful concept, to be lovers of the truth, especially in a society that basically thrives on a lie or many lies. There's so many out there. Even the concept of we are our bodies, in a way, is a lie, because we're not. We are something else. Like, if we are our bodies, how do we explain love or these intangible things that drive us and lead us to many great things? So thank you for sharing that. I think every parent watching can learn from that and really take notes.
Yeah, I think there's that saying, are we a material being having a spiritual experience, or are we a spiritual being having a material experience? And I used to say to the kids, every 7 years, apparently all of the atoms in our body change. So who we are today is going to be physically totally different in 7 years. So what was it that we were? And what are we going to become? So, it's to me, it's part of becoming conscious of really thinking through. I used to think, well, what are people thinking when they're doing these things? And then I realized they just weren't thinking. And I think becoming conscious and aware of the path we have and the opportunity to contribute and assist others is really, really vital for us as individuals and as a community, but accepting what each person's able to do rather than judging them or making them do what we want them to do.
Yeah, that's amazing. So you started the school mostly, it sounds like, for the sake of your own children and really thinking about that, as well as some other factors. But then your kids eventually went through the school and graduated, but you didn't shut the school down. So why did you stay open?
It was just such an amazing experience. At the beginning, I hadn't been really in education. I taught school when I was living in Guyana, which I did for about 6 years, but I had not actually been in the system here. So when I took on this task, which was probably very bold, I decided, that we would do this with my wife, but we weren't sure if we could be successful, at doing it. My wife was a teacher by training, but had actually worked more in child and youth work.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, she was from Nova Scotia. But, I think the biggest challenge was, at the end of the day, what were we trying to do? And how were we going to be sure that we'd be successful? Which is the reason a lot of people don't do things, because it's so much easier to be critical of other things than it is to actually do something and make a difference. So I decided that, okay, since I didn't know exactly how to do this, what did I want? And with the teachers, we consulted about what were we trying to achieve. And we determined that through consultation that we were going to try to achieve creating a sense of wisdom in judgment in our students that would be supportive and encouraging of others, but would ultimately mean that they would become very conscious of their role as moral agents of social change, which ultimately is true leadership. And so then we thought, well, okay, it's all right to have that lofty goal, but how's that going to play out? So what we actually did in consultation with the teachers is every Friday we'd have a staff meeting after the school had carried on its activities for the week, and we would ask ourselves, what, are we achieving? Are the students showing us what we're hoping to see? And I kind of made a rule that the teachers, I think, became aware of, which was we don't blame the students. We're the ones that are in charge of the environment. And so if the students are not getting what they need to produce what would be wise, then we need to figure out what program change or what thing could we add, what else could we do, or how else could we do it.
Right.
Because we want to make sure that whatever we're doing is actually achieving the result. And so, it was, again, this love of truth. And also in that, you always get many different perspectives of what the problem is and what's going on and how to do it.
Right.
And then we'd create programs within which we still are operating today. When I say programs, I mean initiatives that integrate. And, I used to use this. One of our dance teachers, actually, that came from Stratford, had this image where she said, this place is like a greenhouse for talent. And I really loved that image when she said it, because I thought, okay, a greenhouse has these plants, and these plants have the potential to flower and the potential for beauty and the potential for all these things. If you looked at them at the beginning, you might not think that that could happen, but you had to create the conditions in which all of that would take place, and you had to support them, and you had to make it possible. So to do that, we come up with this concept of course, this building that we have is a small building. So we always started with this concept of a micro school, that it should be
Right.
a micro school of about 100 students. And the reason for that is so that we'd be really connected as a community. We'd really know each other, and we'd be able to care. There's no pedagogical reason for large schools other than a financial motive, which actually probably isn't even wise at this time. So it doesn't really make sense. But, looking at it from the point of view that we did, it also feels more risky because you have your judgment sitting right in front of you, like either you're doing it or you're not doing it.
Yeah,
and there's not
right.
a lot of things going on that you can say, oh, well, that's because of this and that. So again, this putting off of responsibility. I'm not saying people consciously do that, but it tends to happen in big environments because those environments make you feel like things are out of control. You can't deal with all of this, and you shouldn't be expected to. And then soon that just slips away to more and more indifference.
Yeah, but that's my favorite part of working at Nancy Campbell, actually. And over the past 11 years, that's exactly what I've learned. Because we're small, we actually have the ability, and our students have the ability, to make change quickly, right? If you're in a school of, 2,000 kids, and then you notice there's a problem with backbiting amongst your friends, it's much harder to create change. It's still possible, and everyone should try and make the effort. But when you're in that smaller community, or even the concept of your neighborhood, like just dealing with less people at a time, you can have a much more profound impact, simply sometimes by leading by example. If there's, and in one classroom, when you have 10 students, if one student is speaking very respectfully, of others with a different culture than them, and being really honest and working hard, but also having fun, it rubs off very quickly. But I guess the same is also true for those who are maybe trying to undermine that kind of behavior. So it's like you said, it's right in front of you, the fruits of our actions. And so, but that's literally is my favorite part. I mean, I have many favorite parts of working here, but that's got to be the top one, because there's so much hopelessness in our world. Most people that I talk to anyways, they know that there's problems. They don't want the problems in our society. They want change, but they don't know how to do it, and they don't think the politicians are doing it. They don't think world leaders are doing it, or religion is doing it. They don't know anything about any good initiative other than a few things here and there. But when you really boil it down to a smaller group of people, you're very empowered, and you can be very hopeful about, I can impact that one person today.
Yeah.
I can have a deep conversation with that person, and that will affect us for the rest of today. And then tomorrow I can do that again. And in a small community, that snowballs quickly. Yeah,
I think that's very perceptive about how change happens, and in a small environment. Somebody said to me very early on, that a person that's unwell has tremendous power over everybody else around them, and creates a kind of general sort of illness. So it's kind of an interesting thing that when you're able to create an environment that is supportive and encouraging, when that shows up, when something shows up that's contrary to that, it's pretty evident where it's coming from if the environment is small. And then the next step, which my wife always would talk about, is just because people are doing things wrong, that doesn't mean they want to, and it doesn't mean that they're, negative or evil or any of these things. It just means that for whatever reason, they haven't figured out how to move beyond that. Because, ultimately individuals want to have peace and happiness and productivity and creativity. But, how do we get into all that other stuff? So it really is so important that if we're going to learn anything, it is that we are responsible for the environment. So talking to the students, do you really think that the 10 or 15 teachers that are here are going to create this environment for over 100 people? No, it has to be everybody is going to do it. So we would pose the questions to the students, like, what kind of environment do you want? Like, do you want an environment of backbiting? And if we were to have that, what's the outcome of that? Well, the outcome of that is war, ultimately. That's where it goes. So it's either going to be little wars or big wars, but it's all wars.
Right.
So is that what it is we want to see? Because if it isn't, then we're going to have to address the discipline of how to better communicate. So we don't resort to backbiting about one another. We actually have ways and mechanisms and processes. So, I'd say to the students, well, what do we have to do as administration to make things more open so that we can talk about these things and change things? So everybody has to do their part. Maybe we think what we're doing is ideal, but that may not be the opinion of others. So just being amenable, like one of the qualities of the learned should be to be amenable, able to be persuaded. And I think the problem is our society holds up experts as they know. Well, they might know, but things keep changing. So let's be aware
so true,
that we have to be amenable. We have to listen to people. We have to talk to people. And I think once people feel like their environment, they're connected. Like addictions and all these things happen because of isolation. Why do people isolate? They isolate because their environment they're in is not one that they feel they can inhabit. So how do we accommodate this diversity of view and create an environment where the expectation is everybody here has got gifts and they're bringing them to the table. And if we create the right environment, just like the greenhouse, everybody's going to be doing flowering, but I can't say you're supposed to flower this way or that way. All we can do is create the conditions.
I don't know what type of flower you're going to become.
Right. We don't know.
Yeah.
In fact, wow me, because honestly, if there's one thing that I've been over and over again at Nancy Campbell, it's wowed by what kind of talents start to come out when you create the right environments. I have parents tell me, my son or my daughter won't ever do that. But then next thing you know, they're up on the stage and doing these things and those things.
They're leading the dances.
Yeah, because it's such an encouraging environment. Like we don't have criticism. People don't want it. We want progress and the pursuit of perfection and excellence. That's what we want. And when everybody's kind of dedicated to that and nobody's judging another person for any of their failures, in fact applaud the failures, that means somebody's trying. And that's actually what happens at Nancy Campbell. Somebody makes a mistake on the piano and everybody starts clapping.
That's
wonderful.
So true.
Keep going. So that's a part of the culture that is risk for good things.
And support those who are taking the risk. Give them the love. So you mentioned to be amenable, and I just wanted to say I've seen you in multiple staff meetings at our school where you're saying something really passionately and strongly, like this is the way it should be, but then someone presents new information and then you just pause and say, okay. And it's like it can be jarring or shocking, I think, to especially some of our newer staff to think, oh, he just changed his mind about this. And I've heard you say once, like, I can be amenable. I can change. So that's really powerful. And one prime example is Chat GPT. I remember we had an emergency staff meeting, and some teachers and most teachers were really freaking out, thinking about, because students were submitting essays that ChatGPT wrote for them and different things, and they had legitimate concerns. But I remember being in the meeting, and then you just said, well, how is this different from the internet? You know, and this is just new information. This is just a new tool. You know, how is this different from them getting advice from their grandma or their mom or their dad or whatever? And the funny thing is, some teachers now using ChatGPT to help them with lesson plans after that meeting.
That's right. Well, you know, if we think about it, human beings are the most important asset that we have in the world, and if we can do anything to help them contribute with less work, so they can go farther in the good areas that they know, I think we should embrace that, because progress is a sign of, you know, the Creator's love. So when there is progress, we immediately react like, is this a change that's good, or is this not a change? Most changes are just about how do we use them to extend human contribution in creativity and you know, and love. But the problem is, we, in addition to the way we present leadership as all-knowing, which historically we've done that, when really we should be presenting leadership as being amenable, which allows us to trust leadership more, if we actually think we have the capacity to persuade. But more importantly, you'll watch this on the news a lot, is where people say, oh, the president changed his mind about this, or the, you know, like, and that's used as a criticism.
That's right.
You know, so it puts out this idea that not only should you know what to do, but if you change your mind, you're somehow weak. And I think that's a really tragic thing, because I hope that my staff and the students would be so challenging that I would have to really be thinking deeply about, what does this mean? How does this affect the future reality? You know, like, we're very agile beings and able to accommodate and integrate for the progress of humanity. And as long as we keep the goal as service and progress of humanity, then it allows us a standard. Is this going to cause growth? We should have the growth standard. Is this going to cause growth and development for all peoples, not just for a few? You know, then I think we start having a standard that makes us comfortable, and a way for us to integrate new advances that are so important. And technology, of course, is the area that we're going to be really, really challenged.
100%. And so just to go off that and into my next section of the podcast.
So we're segueing
into the ChatGPT section. Dun dun dun. It's funny. We're only into episode 6, I think, 6 or 7. And it's becoming like a thing, like the ChatGPT section. So I actually trained ChatGPT this morning on our school's 19 moral leadership capabilities.
I hope I'm not going to be tested.
And no, you won't be tested. And those capabilities are kind of the values that shape our school since the beginning. And it's kind of similar to how you said with your own children to become lovers of truth. So now with every student at Nancy Campbell, it's this concept of these moral capabilities, as well as the staff. So all the staff need to be learning these, and not just learning them or knowing them, but trying to put them into action. And they're very challenging. You know, even the first one is assessing your own strengths and weaknesses without involving the ego. Any adult grown human would really struggle with that and really spend time trying to work on it. So anyways, I trained ChatGPT with these things. I told it a little bit about you, and then I asked it for 10 profound questions, which we won't ask all of them, but we'll go to a few. So here's number 1. How has Nancy Campbell Academy's focus on service to the community, the arts, and social justice impacted the lives of its students over the past 30 years?
Well, that's a big question, but it's one that I'm very confident about, because I think I don't think I actually realized how important service is in the development of knowledge and skills and capacity to actually contribute. Because it's one thing to have, theoretical base for this is what you can do, these are the things that you might want to do. But when it comes to actually doing it, then you really start to learn. And then you have to reflect on what you tried to do. And so to me, making sure that our learning is connected to service and that service is the route by which we get inspired to learn, I think has been probably the most profound thing that I've learned working with Nancy Campbell.
Wow.
And it hasn't been easy because there's a real resistance to get out into the field. And that resistance is often based on, well, we have to know all these things, or will this compromise that? But what I've seen is that service creates the motivational force in individuals to develop their capacities. So disconnection of education from the idea of being of service and contributing. I think, I said we raised our kids to be lovers of truth. The second principle that we watch is to be of service to mankind. That those two things are always working together. And in order to be of service to mankind, we have to be willing to pursue the real truth about a situation,
Right.
And so if I think, like, I can tell you so many stories about the transformation of individuals and even the parents and families that trusted us to develop their youth, and what it means to them and how grateful they are, and the relationships and bonds that they create with each other, which are more powerful than probably anything that I've seen. In fact, I had an educator once come to me from Iqaluit, and he said, my wife, who's a graduate of Nancy Campbell, will travel thousands of miles to go and see her fellow students. And he said, I went to school my whole life with all of my friends, but I wouldn't do that. What is going on? And I said, well, it's a pretty intense environment because everybody's working hard to transform, living together, breathing and serving, and that makes such a bond at that critical age when everything in life is being questioned and turned upside down. Like childhood is a period of organization, and then adolescence is the period of disorganization, and then adulthood is the period of reorganization. But this is the examining time. It shouldn't be that we have to pursue destructive things to investigate those. We know what they're going to do. But to really understand what works and what makes a difference, youth are probably the most advanced guard for questioning the assumptions of society, because they really want to know that this is true, or they don't want to be part of a hoax, and they really hold people to account. And unfortunately, some of that tremendous capacity to really investigate reality and truth is the richest at the time of adolescence, but often that capacity is buried in people buying into some of the hoax or some part of it. So if you really want to create, I hope that if I were to say what I think Nancy Campbell would do, it is like I say to the students, if you're doing service for the community, you don't have to tell me about it. The community is going to tell me about it. And if Nancy Campbell is an effective instrument for transforming individuals to make their contributions, then the world's going to tell us about it. So whether it's big or small, we're not looking for big things. We're looking for true service with a pure heart and a good intention. And if we have that from our students, I think, and I know that they've been highly effective. We had a girl come back from Poland one time. She was an executive in a helicopter company, and she had graduated. She had only been here a year, and I remember she wanted to speak to all the students, so we let her do that. And she went to a great deal of difficulty to come back. And she said, "You should listen to everything that they tell you." Because it's all because of this that I understand the true meaning of what my life is about, and
Right.
and it wasn't that we gave answers. We gave processes by which values can be distilled and we can become true to living according to those values. So I think that's what Nancy Campbell does. It teaches people to identify their values and then really live according to those values without prescribing what those are, but really investigating what are the truthful, real values that are going to make you happy.
That's amazing. That's huge.
It is. Good thing we only have a little part each to do.
Yeah. And one thing I love about you is your sayings. So one of my sisters was going through a little struggle the other week. So she called me, she was telling me about it. And then I said, hey, it's just a storm in a teacup. You stir it and it goes away. And I got that from you. So I love your sayings.
That's it.
Where'd you pick up your sayings from?
Oh, it's just my family. My father had a lot of them.
Okay.
And so, some of them just ring, right, when you see this going on. But it really, to me, a lot of these sayings put things in perspective, like...
Yeah, they help.
Youth, I just talked about the qualities of youth, quality of people that are elderly that they bring to the community, I think, is also kind of a refined simplicity to how we weather storms of life, which everybody's going to go through. And some of these sayings, I think, kind of emerge from that. So it just kind of puts things in perspective. You want to be encouraging.
Did you just call yourself elderly?
Well, no, I'm just, as I teach the students at the school, you're not old, you're just older.
Yeah, older. Because I've seen you freestyle rap in front of thousands of people.
You've made me do that.
Multiple times.
You've made me do that several times.
That might come out later at the end of this episode.
I don't think that's going to come out.
We'll see what happens. We'll see what happens.
That's to be continued.
Yeah, to be continued. So you kind of answered the second question that it asked as well. And
do you mean I'm actually
you're more advanced than artificial intelligence. What do we call you? Organic intelligence.
I guess that's what makes it artificial.
You're Stratford's Organic Intelligence Ambassador. See, each guest I give a title.
Now I'm going to be in trouble. I don't like praise,
Oh, okay.
My father used to say, the closer you are to the top, the closer you are to the door.
So you're the praiseless one.
I want to be. It's the safest. Keep your head down,
But when you started this school, you were the principal. You were also the janitor.
The snow shoveler.
The snow shoveler. The teacher.
That's it. The dorm parent.
The dorm parent.
Oh, Lord have mercy.
There's nothing more humbling than doing that.
It was. And when you dealt with students in the night and then you had to show up fresh the next day and have a fresh start,
yeah, everything's fine.
It was quite an
Nothing happened.
That's right.
But they're up at 2 a.m. causing problems, yeah.
So sometimes when people ask me how I'm doing, I say, well, most of the parts of my life are doing very well.
Yeah. So how do you see the role of the arts in developing moral leadership capabilities and shaping students' understanding of social justice issues? Well, that's a good question.
That's a good question, ChatGPT.
Thank you, ChatGPT.
You're doing well, and this is right up Mr. Rushdy's alley here. Yeah, I actually think that the use of the arts, I think everybody is an artist. I think the only reason that they haven't seen what they can produce is because of the environments that have not brought that out.
Right.
And I think we don't want to prescribe what kind of artists people are.
Right.
Because if you watch any programs about revealing talent, you realize that humanity has this endless array of talents that are yet unspoken of. Never mind the ones that we see and get awed by. So if instead of looking at things as a finite thing that, so-and-so has talent, or I remember somebody once said that, our society worships the top 5% of talent, when really there's a whole community of talent. And, I think creating an environment where people become aware of their talents. I can't tell you how many parents have come and said, my kid would never say anything, never mind get up on a stage and, do this. So why did that happen? It happened because there's an environment of encouragement. There's inspiring things that are going on. People start to feel they have a contribution. Sometimes I just walk up to a student and say, I want to see you doing something here, I'm not telling you to do it. I just think it would be a shame if you didn't.
Yeah.
And then they do, like I don't want to be arbitrary, but it's amazing to see. And then they produce the most amazing things. I just listened to the new Nancy Campbell album from last year.
Nancy Campbell Academy, new album. Check it out. Keep the Faith, streaming everywhere. Quick shout out.
Yeah, well, that's not even just a shameless promotion. I listened to it all the way home, and I was astounded by the capacity of these students to produce things that really were, top grade stuff. And it's not everything that's on that album, because it's very diverse, is for everybody. But it's kind of fascinating to think about the array of what was produced in that year. We kind of do like this. You've been trying to do this album like a yearbook instead, like produce stuff. And so for students, it's great for the memory. But honestly, some of the stuff that they've done was astounding. So to me, the arts is like service. And what arts do is it gives youth an opportunity to amplify their voice. So a youth might try to say something that makes a difference, but when it's amplified through the arts, it goes beyond cold rationalizing, and it creates a movement of the heart that lifts us up and makes us feel more hopeful. So that's the power to me of the arts, and the fact that I believe at the core of my being that every person is an artist. They just have to find their voice in the way, and that's just something that is produced while we're doing many other things. We might not choose to be an artist. We might choose to be a banker, but we'll be a different kind of banker if we have also brought out our artistic talents. And research shows that when you're doing arts and academics together, that you advance in both, because discipline leads to discipline. And, being productive and creative leads to confidence and joy and happiness. So, to me, the arts is a way in to maybe youth that have closed down otherwise, or maybe it's just something that flows out of people. But the fact is, we are responsible to create an environment that allows people to make those contributions. And then the refinement of them becomes just a natural part of our life. And we feel more and more happiness.
That's amazing. Yeah, there's a book called The Artist's Way. And in that book, I didn't actually read the whole book, but I skimmed it. And in the book, it says that we have two types of brains or minds. One is creative and one is analytical. And that when we sit down to be creative, usually we have a well-trained analytical mind, because that's our society, very analytical, and we praise that. But usually when we sit down to be creative, that analytical mind takes hold of us and actually prevents us from being creative, because it's analyzing immediately. Oh, that doesn't sound like Beyonce. Oh, that's not as good as, insert famous artist there, the top 5% that we all praise. And so what the book says is you need to put that mind aside when you first sit down to create. And because the creative mind only creates ideas.
No judgment.
It doesn't judge itself. It doesn't judge others. It just creates artistic ideas. And in my experience here at the school, it's exactly what you just said. The way to allow that creative mind to be unleashed is to create the conditions for it. So you can't guarantee, no one can guarantee, I will unleash your creative mind. You can't. But you can say, we have a system of creating an environment where there's a high probability of your creative mind being unleashed, because we're attempting to remove that analytical mind in these moments of creativity by doing very practical things like cheering you on for your courage.
Yeah.
So you know that if you try, you're going to receive that support.
Right.
And so you'll be more confident to pursue it again. But that's wildly different than what we see out there. Like, I've been to youth talent shows, and some youth are incredible at singing up there, but the panel of judges, it's in the name, they're judging, they just decide that, this kid was better than that kid, and they say, okay, yeah, you didn't make it. Okay, you're the best one, and so you're going to win some sort of prize. And you were runner-up 2 and 3, and you probably shouldn't pursue a career in singing because that was really flat and sharp. But that's a kid, that's a youth, like 15, 16 years old. What are we doing as a society, right? We need to look at these youth and say, you had the courage to come up here, keep going.
Yeah, and because you have the desire, that probably means there's something deep inside there that has to come out.
Yeah.
You know, if so we got to welcome the desire and we've got to fan the flames. But I was also thinking that same person that said we worship the top 5% of talent, and you know, then he said, what is the other 95%? Chopped liver, you know, like, so it was this, it really was a challenging thought to think about, what if everybody is an artist and we just have to bring that out? If we start with that assumption, then we're going to see a huge amount more talent. I just went to, you know, some different concerts that are pretty diverse, but I went to Ed Sheeran's, and one of the things that he said, which was really interesting, is that he just started writing songs. Like, he tried to write 5 or 10 songs a day. And then sometimes he would send them out and some people would pick them up and they'd become great hits. But he said, I didn't really know which ones were going to become, you know, the hits or not the hits. And I was just like letting it come out. And I thought, well, look, this is a guy who's, you know, obviously able to entertain Wembley by himself with no other band, alone on the stage for several hours.
Guitar,
And when you think about the capacity of that person to entertain and create, you know, but here he is saying, I just thought the only way I'm going to find these gems is just keep writing them out, writing them out.
And he's really interesting. He said on an interview that people say, how did you, you know, oh no, people say you were born with this talent. I wish I was born with that talent. And he always cuts people off to say, no, I wasn't. I was not born with singing talent. I worked really hard. And then in that interview, he played an early recording and he's singing all flat and it sounds terrible. You know, technically speaking, it was terrible.
Yeah.
But then you hear his stuff that he's doing now and it's absolutely incredible. And so I love that he does that, because especially being at that level of fame, you would think that's not something you should do. But what he's really providing to everyone is the truth.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's powerful, you know, it's and that can really move us. So I think I might maybe 1 or 2 more questions from ChatGPT and then we'll wrap it up with the freestyle rap. We'll see. Well, we'll see. We'll see. We'll see what happens. Okay. So how do you empower students to recognize relationships of domination and contribute to transforming them into relationships based on interconnectedness, reciprocity, and cooperation? And we both know which moral capability that was based off of. But that's a profound question. I think many youth are out there struggling with these relationships of domination, and not just youth, all people. So it's a challenging question. So, you know, but yeah, what do we do as a school for that?
Well, I think the first thing, really, this is an interesting one of the moral capabilities, because youth are often the brunt of you know, power moves on the part of adults, and they just, you know, learn to kind of take it, and or maybe they rebel against it, and you know, whatever, but they're still reacting to it. And I think what we try to do here is realize that we are evolving from our adolescence as humanity to our adulthood. And adulthood would be characterized by reciprocity and cooperation. So it's one thing to know I don't want power used inappropriately on me, but it's another thing for me to know, where am I trying to get to in this relationship? So if I'm going to have a good relationship with you, then there has to be real feelings of reciprocity and cooperation. And even if you misbehave, you're not going to be so powerful that I would care about that. In other words, I would realize you're having a problem, and that I'm going to, you know, try to bring it back to reciprocal and cooperative. Maybe I can't do that. Maybe you're not in a place where we can get there. So I might just have to discontinue. So there's different strategies of how we help someone that's struggling with that. But if we get legalistic, it's a bid for power. So whenever I'm in a conversation with somebody who starts to move things like that, then I start, like bells go off, like this really isn't about the truth we're trying to develop here. It's about power and competition. And that kind of thing is not going to leave one of us feeling that great. Not that we always need to be feeling great, but I want to be able to make a contribution. You want to be able to make a contribution. So if I'm doing something that's blighting that or making that impossible, then my first step, your first step, is to become aware that that's what I'm doing. And my first step, then I may not, it's very likely I'll be blinded to the fact that I'm doing that. In other words, again, going back to my wife always saying you don't blame people for what they're doing, you figure out why it's happening. So I've got a pattern of being competitive. I've got a pattern of not wanting you to be more significant. Then how am I going to be helped out of that? Like what would be the way that, so we do teach actually some techniques to students and others that we don't like to have formulaic techniques, but ways to change the conversation, to help turn relationships of power and dominance into relationships of reciprocity and cooperation. So learning some strategies, we're moving from a power model to a growth-centered model. Which would mean my goal is to say, if we're together here, then let's grow in some new ways. Let's figure out what we're going to contribute. And it wouldn't be that helpful for you to become the dominant one and for you to be saying that you're better than me or vice versa. So we're not going to leave that exchange, both of us feeling good about what the future looks like. So if I or you can change it to reciprocity and cooperation, we will end up feeling far more productive and creative. So it's really becoming conscious of that first, and recognizing that people have patterns because of their history, their upbringing, their lack of trust because of violation of relationships and so on. But not being intimidated by that history and just kind of looking at, let's create a new opportunity for us to become, different, to make our contribution.
Wow. That's the opposite of cancel culture.
The opposite, yes.
I would look back at something you did and then say that you don't deserve anything because of that.
That's such a strange experience. Like, what are we going to do with all these canceled people? Send them to another planet? I mean,
it's like a dystopian future movie where you get canceled and you end up in some other island.
Yeah. And I used to have, sometimes I would be in a place where people would be really criticizing their leaders. And I always thought that was kind of interesting. I remember saying to a group, and it was a bit of a dangerous thing to say, because I was in a village and they were talking to me about how horrible their leaders were. And I said, where did these leaders come from? Because are they not created by your people, by you, like, we have to take responsibility for what's emerging here, Like, not to say that what somebody does wrongly is theirs, but what environment have we created that such things could thrive? Like, we have a conscious responsibility to clean up our own doorstep and our own backyard and think of what is it we're teaching our children to be like that and take that on, or to find different ways for us to move things forward. So again, it's about becoming conscious and thinking about what are we trying to do here, and stop blaming, because we can blame the leaders, we can blame this, we can blame all of it. But
it's easy to blame.
Yeah, blaming, there's a saying that I heard when I was in grade 9, grumblers don't grow. So
another saying.
So grumblers don't grow is like a very simple truth, right? So if grumblers don't grow, then do I want to be one of those people that is not growing? I got to stop grumbling. I've got to figure out, what am I going to do instead of grumble in order to see this progress take place? Take responsibility for my environment and who I'm working with.
Yeah, and I think that's something that you have put into practice personally in a powerful way. I've never once heard you grumble, and I've worked closely with you for about 11 years or more, and I've seen you, even when the pandemic came, I'm going to share my honest truth, I thought you were going to shut the school down, because I thought it would be a moment for you to say, we had a good run, there's a global pandemic. Let's just shut it down. But you didn't do that. You didn't grumble once. You just said, okay, this is interesting and different. Let's go into virtual reality. So that's a quality of, I guess you could say, making lemonade out of lemons, But how did you develop that capacity to have an issue or a problem presented to you and only think about the solution and move forward and take action? Because you do that all day long. You have many businesses and ventures and, different things that you do. And I know from being around you, everyone's coming at you with problems. And then you're there just dealing with problems all day long. So what would you say is the secret sauce to unlocking that problem-solving magic?
I believe in the capacity of people to solve their problems. So very often they may come at me, but, usually with a few questions or so on, they solve their problem, come up with some ideas. So that makes it easier for me to think, okay, I'm not going to get overwhelmed with this because we have resources. We have these people that are coming up with these really good questions. So that probably means they're halfway there with the answers, and we just have to figure out how to go. And to be honest, when it came to the pandemic, I always consider every possibility, including closing the school, and this is an opportunity for me to exit stage right. But I consider that very briefly because I don't like to let myself off the hook. If it's tough, well, that's great. And so and also, I don't just do that for the sake of, I did tell somebody once, I'm a bit like a donkey. I just keep going in one direction, and in order to get my attention, you'd probably have to hit me with the 2x4, and then I'd probably look at what you hit me with, and then I'd start walking in the same direction.
Right.
So I don't want to say that, I'm not bragging about that, but I'm thinking perseverance and finishing something is a characteristic that has to be developed, and we have to discipline ourselves with it too. I have to say, I tell my kids, you're not a consumer, you're a creator of things. We are to make a difference. So I don't believe I can ask somebody else to do something that I won't do myself. So in fact, to me, that's the test of my advice is, am I prepared to do this? Because in the end, it might just be me that's going to be doing it.
Right. Wow.
And so I think that's where, and then I actually truly believe in the confirmation of the Creator. Like if something, unimaginable obstacles have been overcome to have the school continue and to be successful. And I'm so excited to be a participant of that. I don't have a need to be, the one. I'm very interested in being here because it's so joyful working with all these creative, talented people that are so dedicated to the development of students. Like to be in that environment, like this is heaven.
Yeah.
If somebody says to me, well, you've done this, I always say, well, I've been a participant like everybody else. And I say that honestly, because when you create those environments that are going to bring out talent, they're going to bring out talent in all of us. And nobody's changing more than ourselves. The ones that are supposed to apparently be leading the thing are going to be the ones that are going to be changing the most because they're going to be challenged in every direction. And I find that environment the most inspiring. I don't want boring. I want challenges that are meaningful. I don't like, I feel like life, you're going to suffer in your life no matter what happens. So just get over the idea that you're not going to suffer. Like society teaches people that if you live your life properly, you won't suffer. You'll have a peaceful, wonderful. That is such a, I ask a room of people. I ask a bunch of people, how many of you have not suffered? Put up your hand. Well, nobody puts up their hand if they're going to be honest. So, okay, that's a myth. You're going to be suffering for sure. What you actually get to decide is, are you going to suffer meaningfully for something of value? Or are you going to suffer meaninglessly because of things that you didn't think about or didn't try to do? So that's the decision. Not am I going to have to go through things. You definitely will be going through things. So let's make it really worthwhile.
And how many of us are out here suffering meaninglessly?
Yeah, we don't want to be doing that.
That's profound. That's really profound. And I think that's the interesting thing. You mentioned this is like heaven here, but on a day-to-day basis, it is not easy to run this school or even be a participant in it. It's a challenge, right? But why does it feel like heaven or joyful? And I think that's because it's a meaningful suffering in a way.
You made me think of this. I got to say this story because it had such an impact on me. We had a student in the school whose mother was a teacher, and this mom said that she was so pleased with the development in her daughter that she wanted her son to come. So her son came, and then she said, I can take a year off of my school and come and teach there if you need somebody in English. So I thought, okay, well, that's interesting and great. So it happened that we needed an English teacher, so she came. In our training, the very first, we always go for 3 or 4 days to a lodge to really develop our unity and our training. So we went there, and during that time, I noticed she was getting a bit distressed. So I went up to her and I said, is something wrong? And she said, well, this is so different of training than anything that I've ever been part of. And I said, well, what's the difference? Because, of course, I haven't been in the other systems. Right. She said, well, you're telling us that we should love the students, we should be of service to them, we should bring out their talents. She said, that's not what I was trained like before. It was like, get control of the environment, make sure they don't overtake your class. It was all about control. This is all about expansive things and love. And she said, so I said, well, how do you feel about that? She said, oh, I just love it. It's great. So then come November, she comes to me and says, I really have to go back to my other job in January. And I was kind of shocked because I thought, okay, maybe we didn't meet what, the standard she was thinking. So I said, well, what about your kids? Because I thought maybe she's unhappy. And she said, oh, no, I want my kids to stay here. And I said, so you were supposed to be here for a year. Like, what's the... She said, well, I'm just going through a lot of personal things, and it's just really hard to do that and also give to the students what I know they deserve and what I want to provide for them. And so I don't want to diminish their experience or what it is. And so I'm going to, let someone else take over. And I thought that was such an amazing thing because when you said there's a standard of how much care and love and capacity that has to be given, and it is joyful and it's so rewarding, but it comes down to where there is love, there is always time. And teachers here, and I'm sure many other places as well, that's the secret sauce, is the love and care and nurturing that they give.
Amazing. And you could relate it to the refreshing taste of coconut water.
Oh, God. So this... This is our Caribbean little rap we do. Coconut water is good for your daughter. Coconut water is good for your daughter.
Thank you so much.
Do you want me to do a little Indian chant? No?
Indian chant?
Yeah, it's like... Kaise bani, polari bena chatani, kaise bani, polari bena chatani, kaise bani. You lived in India. You know how to do some...
I lived in India. You're right. I did not learn how to do that.
So this little Kaise Bani song is a song from Guyana, the Indian population there is.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah. So we used to sing that on our trips just to have fun.
Amazing. That's wonderful. Mr. Naylor,
I may regret the fact that I did that, but I did it.
You'll never regret it. You're going to love it.
Are you going to applaud the mistakes, though?
Yeah, we're going to.
Okay.
We're cheering you on.
All right, great.
I didn't think there were mistakes.
This has been fun. I'm so happy that you invited me.
Thank you. I'm so honored you came here and sat down in your old bedroom.
Oh, yes. This used to be our bedroom when we moved here, and when we had our whole group of...
Looks a little different now.
Yes, you've done a great job here. Excellent studio. You're gonna have your grand opening. August
26th.
And this facility, I think, will empower. art needs empowerment, and it needs structures and places. So when we have our festivals, people prepare for that because they got a place to do something.
Yeah.
So having this place to be able to create is so exciting. I can't imagine what's going to come out of Stratford.
Yeah, I'm really, really pumped. Really, really pumped.
And you're a great guy to be doing all of this. We're so lucky to have you.
Thank you. Goodbye, everybody.